We're gonna let some folk in. Let's see here. All right. All right. Well, happy Thursday, everybody. It is exactly 12 o'clock on the dot. Time for us to get started. Today is our buyer consultations that convert. Buyer consultations that convert. This is obviously, as we know, a continuation of our discussion from the prior weeks where we are walking through working with buyers this month, right? And so go ahead and get us going. While we have some folks still coming in the room, I see a lot of familiar faces. I do see some new faces. So I want to make sure that I give a formal introduction to the new faces or introduce myself to the new faces that I see in the room. For those who I have not had a chance to meet before, my name is Ray Cole Jackson. I'm a South Florida real estate attorney. A little bit about me personally. I am again from Florida. I attended the University of Florida, so I always say go Gators. I went over to California where I got my law degree, and I was the founder of the Real Estate Law Society. Came back home to Miami, got my LLM in real property development. I'm a proud licensed Florida Realtor and a Florida mortgage loan officer. So all things real estate. Hey, Della, how are you? Good to see you. Also the founder of Title Experts, our title insurance company, um, as well as the Purchase Ready team, which is our lending team. So all things real estate, again, is what we are always having a conversation about here on Thursdays. Now, with today's discussion, again, last week we talked about, we went over the buyer brokerage agreement, right? We went over the sections, we went over the very important sections of it, the hot spots, those things that you should absolutely be clear on how to, number one, how to explain those sections to the customer as well as know them yourself, right? In case there's any gray areas or there's any hiccups. So today we're moving into the buyer consultation, and we're going to talk about how do you structure a buyer consultation that builds authority and trust. You're going to deliver a clear buyer roadmap that reduces confusion and objections. And then thirdly, by the end of today's discussion, you should be able to confidently present for execution the buyer brokerage agreement. Remember, we talked about that last week. And so these are the three main points that by the end of our time together today, we should have accomplished. All right. So the purpose of the buyer consultation. So I mentioned this previously, and it of course warrants making the same comment today. The buyer consultation was always important. It was always important to for professionalism, right, and all the other results that we're going to talk about today. But now that we have buyer's brokerage agreement that must be executed before you provide real estate services, well, now we must have what I call a meeting of the minds. You must have a consultation in some form or fashion, right? Whether it's quick and on the fly, and you just say, "Oh, I'm going to send you an agreement to sign," which of course that's not effective, and we're going to make sure that we drill that point in today. But there will be a conversation had, right? Gone are the days that you could. Yes, there's a handout. I'm going to drop the link in shortly when we get to that point. Gone are the days where you just get a phone call, you run on MLS, find a couple properties, and then go show properties. Gone are the days of that. Nope, nope. Again, now you must have what I call a meeting of the minds. And so, with that being an absolute requirement by virtue of needing to have the buyer brokerage agreement executed, it is high time that realtors have a structure for their buyer consultation, right? So that we know that we hit the main purposes of the time together. So here's the misconception that we're not going to have by the time we finish our conversation today. The misconception is that we treat the consultation as just an informational meeting. We just have a time that we talk quickly, longer, who knows. but we just wing it based on the flow of the conversation, however the conversation goes. Well, what I would propose to you is when you go into a listing appointment, I hope that you have a structure. I'm going to assume, right? So because we've always had to have a listing agreement executed, there's just you will certainly push more in the arena of creating structure around that appointment because with a seller, you always had to have a listing agreement executed. That was a requirement. You had to do that. So again, whether your structure with the consultation with the seller was tight or loose, you knew that at the end of that conversation, you had to have the listing agreement executed. And so with that being said, you have to now look at your buyer consultations the same way. At the end of that conversation, if you intend to continue to work with that buyer, you have to have your buyer's brokerage agreement executed. And so with that being said, now it's not just a wing it. It's not just, oh, we're just going to talk about buying. No, the reality is now you're going to treat that consultation as a decision-making environment. Because at the end of your time with them, they're going to have made some decisions, right? We're going to talk about what those decisions are, but there will be a decision made. There is way more structure now around your time with the buyer. And so the goal of your consultation are threefold, right? The first one is connection. You want to establish rapport with the buyer or buyers, right? Identify their motivation, their urgency, and their pain points. People commit to professionals who make them feel understood, right? So your structure of your buyer consultation is going to start out with making a connection, right? We talked about you've heard before the FORWARD acronym when you're networking with people. You talk about family, occupation, recreation, and desires, right? Dreams. So if you ever get lost on what should I talk about with someone, remember the FORWARD acronym. Family. Oh, you have kids? Occupation. Oh, what do you do for them? Okay. Recreation. What do you enjoy? Oh, I actually enjoy that as well. Dream. What are my aspirations, right? And so, in case you ever get lost, and so similarly, when you start your buyer consultation, you're going to have an icebreaker to make the connection. Of course, you're going to have a very succinct about you. And then how do we pivot into, talking about your buyer? Now, of course, this connection is going to be based upon how do you know the buyer? If it's a family member or a friend, then obviously, you don't need to make so much of they know you personally, but you still need to identify their motivation. You still need to identify their urgency, and you still need to identify their pain points because those factors are going to they're going to influence your home search, right? They're going to influence your timeline, right? So we don't just gloss over that because we don't want to find out at the end where we find a property and the seller, for example, needs they love the property, but the seller needs post-closing occupancy, but the buyer needs to be in and immediately. Ugh, we skipped that part. If you don't want to find that out right later. So again, this is where structure comes in. Education. This is huge. All of these are equally important, but education and expectation, very huge. What are the market conditions? Many of your buyers are going to come in having seen commercials, news headlines, YouTube videos, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Cousin Bob, Sister Sue. You're going to have to educate them on what is realistic, what is actually going on in today's market. And what did they bought 20 years ago? That happens as well, right? And so you have to have structure around educating your buyers. And if they are financing, if they're purchasing using a loan, and you're definitely going to have to be very clear on the financing realities of the current market. Confusion creates hesitation. Clarity creates commitment. Confusion creates hesitation. Clarity creates commitment. You ever heard the phrase, "a confused mind does nothing"? It just stalls. Like, I can't make a decision. And if you force me to make a decision, I'm probably gonna say no, right? So we want to clear out any confusion. Expectations. That's the third goal of your consultation. You want to have what is going to be your communication cadence? When you work with me, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, here's what you can expect as far as communication. Here's how you're going to be able to reach me. Here's when you can expect to hear from me regarding the status of our home search, or once we go into contract, right? Expectations regarding timelines. When can we reasonably expect to be able to go out and shop? What is going to be our offer strategy? Expectations reduce friction and they protect your time. Again, you don't want someone that says, "Oh, I didn't know I couldn't buy a car." Well, that's all we can do. While I was having my loan underwritten, I didn't know that, right? Or, "Oh, I didn't know I had to have cash for an earnest money deposit right now." I'm like, "Oh, I didn't realize that. I thought that came with the loan." Right? All of that is with education and expectation. So those are the three main points. Now, with the consultation, you're gonna have to make a decision. How are you going to conduct your buyer consultation? Because again, now we actually have to have a meeting of the mind. So you probably can think of other delivery methods, but on the screen we mentioned three. The first one is a phone consultation. Now, the goal of that should be to secure a formal consultation. I do not recommend that you attempt to have your buyer consultation over the phone. Under no circumstances, whether they're experienced or not, under no circumstances do I recommend that you attempt to conduct your full buyer consultation over the phone. That should be a screening only mechanism, right? To secure time for you to formally consult them. There's too many moving parts in today's market for you to set clear expectations, right? With a buyer over the phone. Because again, now you have documentation. How are you going to present the documentation? Because you have a buyer's brokerage agreement that needs to be executed, right? So the phone consultation should be used to schedule either a Zoom consultation or in person. Zoom, you guys are probably most likely to do that because it's convenient. Parties can be wherever. The window of time to conduct those is wider because you can easily do, 7 at night or maybe even 7 in the morning if they're saying, "Oh, we're about to take a flight to Italy. We need to knock this out." Or even if they're in Italy, now all of a sudden, if it's just a time change difference. So a Zoom consultation is probably the most likely way that you're going to deliver the consultation. It allows for a presentation of the buyer's brokerage agreement as well as the other information that you're going to share with the buyer to educate them. And then, of course, you have the in-person consultation, which is great because this builds the highest level of trust, right? There's nothing like what they call belly to belly. But what we do know is you want to, whichever of these mechanisms you choose, professional standard, always formalize the consultation, never wing it. Formalize, let there always be a structure. Even if you have to condense the time period, even let's say, for example, your consultation usually takes you about 30 to 45 minutes. And the buyer, or it takes you 45 minutes, and the buyer says, I have 30. I got 30, Jocelyn. You say, okay, but you still have a structure. You still know what you need to, and from there, you know what you can pull out, right? To give them back that 15 minutes. But never wing it. Never wing it. Never wing it. All right? All right. So here's the 5-part consultation flow. Of course, 1 is going to be personal connection. 2, financing clarity. The major cause of most deals canceling is what? Financing fell through. I would want to know that upfront, right? Buying process overview. You're going to high level introduce them through this is the buying process. Again, high level. I do not recommend that you try and have a whole home buyers workshop during your consultation. No. I do recommend that you have a recorded, a longer version that you can share with your buyers, right? But on your consultation, this is not the time to have a home buyers workshop, right? This is time to have a high level overview. Fourth part of your consultation is where we have a conversation about professional relationship. The fact that you are a professional. Here's how we engage. The fifth portion is where that agreement is executed. So for the purpose of today's conversation, again, this is where we go over high level structure with recommendation of what the content should look like at each juncture of your consultation. But ultimately, you're going to develop this based upon your delivery preference, right? Some of you might take this and you may extend it out further. You might double this. You might have 10 parts. But at the very least, these are the 5 most important portions of your buyer consultation, right? So now let's look at each one of them a little bit closer. Part 1, connection. We talked about this. Tell me what prompted you to move. What's their motivation for moving, right? These are some questions that you can ask to execute part 1 of your buyer consultation. What would a successful purchase look like for you, right? We ask open-ended questions to get more information out of them, right? The goal is, of course, to get their motivation and create connection in part 1. Now, part 2, where we get into the meat of it, financing clarity. Are you pre-approved or pre-qualified? They need to know that, first of all, you as the agent should know the difference, because if they don't know the difference, you're going to have to educate them. And I would recommend that you not even assume that they know the difference. You're going to ask them, are you pre-approved or pre-qualified? And they'll say, oh, I'm pre-approved. If they say pre-approved, you're going to probe further. And you're going to say, oh, okay, great. So you provided the lender that you're working with, they pulled your credit. You provided them with your pay stubs, bank statements, tax returns if they needed it. You completed an application. And when they say, oh, wait, no, I didn't bank statements. No, they didn't ask me for that. Or pay stub. No, I just told them how much I made. And you know, ding, ding, ding. Mm-mm. You're not pre-approved, or you're not pre-approved the way that we need you to be pre-approved for certainty. All right. You're going to explain the difference to them between pre-approval, because pre-approval means that the lender has actually collected the required loan application information and verified it, right? It's been underwritten. Versus pre-qualified. Pre-qualified, you just verbally tell me that you make $100,000 a year, you have a 780 credit score, that you've been working at your job for 20 years, that you have no debt, right? And that you have $100,000 in the bank. You just verbally told me that. And basically you verbally telling me that, yeah, you're qualified. You're qualified to apply for approval, right? So this is a very, very, very important portion of your buyer consultation. You're going to assess the underwriting strength of this buyer immediately. Now, of course, if they tell you they're pre-qualified, that doesn't mean that you throw them away, but you've checked the box. You've checked the box to know we need to get a clean pre-approval from the lender. Now, of course, next week we're going to get more into the financing portion of this, where we're going to talk more about pre-approved and what that looks like and the underwriting process. But for the purpose of today, know that at this juncture in the buyer's consultation is when you're having that conversation. All right. Now, part 3. This is your handout. And I'm going to drop this in the chat. This is your takeaway. We're going to review it now, but this is your takeaway for today. Part 3 is where you give the buyer their 30,000-foot overview of the purchase process, right? This is where you give them the 30,000-foot overview of what the purchase transaction process will look like, or the roadmap will look like. The roadmap outlines the essential transition from the initial consultation to final ownership, right? That's what a roadmap should do for them. It's gonna allow the buyer to visualize the 6 core stages of their transaction. It's going to allow you to provide the clarity necessary to move them from hesitation to commitment. All right. So if I tell you, oh, Candace, go to Timbuktu. And you're like, okay. Or Kalamazoo, Missouri. You're like, okay. But if I say, Candace, here's the directions. Here's the GPS. Now you're confident. You're like, okay, well, I'll be there in 36 hours, Ray Cole. You're welcome, Derek, right? So this is why I'm telling you, you can't do this over the phone. You need to show them this is how we're going to get there. This is how we're going to get there. Right? So phase 1, and then we even break it up for them. Phase 1, preparation and strategy. All right, we're going to make it sound real structured. Loan approval, establish their budget, their financing strategy before we begin the search, right? We have to, because if we don't know how much you qualify for, how much you can purchase, then we can't get in the car, right? We can't get in the car because we need the loan approval. Then from there, or pre-approval, from there, now we're going to search for homes, right? Home search is the MLS, obviously, and then we actually tour. I want to make sure that you guys make a difference, that you differentiate between the two. Differentiate between the two. I'm going to drop this handout in the chat again for the link to the handout for those that are coming in. You want to differentiate between the two. So they know that we have to do a good MLS search before we even get in the car, right? You assume that they know, and then it'll just educate them on your process. So we do an MLS search, and then at this point, you also let them know that they'll be receiving emails, right? Once we set the search parameters. And one good strategy, and this is a call in and of itself, and I gotta find this recording. One good MLS strategy is we don't tell the buyer what they can't afford, right? Once they've gotten their pre-approval and we know their purchasing power, we say, oh, okay. They start giving their features. Oh, I want a home. I want a pool. I want a home with a pool. It needs to have a 3-car garage. It's in a gated community, and you're just clicking in MLS. And then, of course, your search is going to start getting narrower and narrower, right? Because when you drop in that price point, if their expectations are non-existent, the MLS will tell them, give them a big fat 0. Sorry. So you're not telling them what they can't afford or what's not available to them. The MLS is telling them. So they can't get mad at you, right? They're not mad at you because you don't build the homes. You're the broker. You're the real estate broker. You find the homes that are available according to their needs and their capabilities to purchase. So that's another strategy, right? With the MLS, you let them see. All right, I'm gonna put, okay, what else you want? Oh yeah, 5,000. Oh yeah, that's nice. All right now, okay. All right, how many acres? Okay, all right now. And you let the MLS tell them, okay, we need to back out the 3-car garage. We need to back out some of the square footage. We need to back out possibly, do you need this pool? Or can it be in a community that has a pool, right? And then so once we go tour, now the buyers understand the urgency of it. They're not just fancy. Well, we'll just go see another one. Well, you saw in the search that show me the state. you you saw in our MLS that these are our options, right? So that they're not feeling like you're holding back from them. Well, you're showing me stuff that I don't like. Well, I showed you where I get these properties from, right? So that'll help you when so the buyer doesn't feel like you're holding back on them. No, you and I both looked in the MLS. All right. All right. Enough of that part. Part three of phase one, offer contract execution. Negotiate terms and formalize the purchase through an executed agreement. Now, with this, I recommend on the next slide, we're going to talk about what some of the documents that you should share with them. Recommend that you provide them with a copy of the as is purchase and sale contract. It should not be the first time that they're seeing 13 pages when you actually go to make an offer. That's scary, and that's not a good that's not the most strategic or professional thing for even a buyer to do. They should see it. They should know what they're signing, right? So make sure that they get that when you're conducting your consultation. Let that be a part of the documentation that you provide to them, along with a roadmap such as this. And then we'll tell them, okay, once we get through phase one, now we're in phase two. All right. Now we're coming into the home stretch, right? Phase two, we're going to conduct inspections of the property and then the appraisal. And you tell them the inspection is of the physical property, is going to confirm the condition of the property. You tell them the appraisal is going to confirm the value of the property. When we go into contract, we're going to make an offer based upon what we believe the property to be worth, based upon sales and other details of your offer, right? If you're just because you're cash doesn't mean you can't do an appraisal, guys, too. Remember that. Of course, if it's financed, you're definitely going to do an appraisal, but just because you make a cash offer does not mean you can't appraise the property. So I just want to put that out there. So you're going to explain to the buyer the difference between the two. Once we get past inspections, the property appraises. Now we're looking at final loan approval. We're going to explain to the borrower. Next week, we're going to talk about the IPAC acronym. Those of you probably heard me hear me mention the IPAC acronym before. You're going to explain to the borrower that final loan approval is when the lender is going to confirm your income. You have sufficient income to make the loan payments. The property, P stands for property, IPAC. We're going to talk about this next week. Don't get yourself all worked up. IPAC is the acronym that I teach you guys to remember the loan underwriting process. I stands for income of the borrower. P stands for the property itself. A stands for asset. C stands for credit. We're going to talk about that next week. What we're telling the buyer is once you go under contract, yes, you've been pre-approved. That pre-approval looks at you personally, right? That pre-approval looks at you personally. By the time we go into contract, now the lender has the P has the property portion of their underwriting framework. Does that make sense? Thanks, Monique. Right? And then the last step of phase two is title and closing, and of course they get their keys. This is where we finalize the title clearing, legal transfer of the property to you, money to the seller. All right. So this is, let me drop this again for folks coming in. This is again a very high level. It was me. And good thing I have my phone on as well. Look at that. Rico, don't play. All right. For some reason, the Wi-Fi did something. So
We missed
let's
about
reshare
2 minutes
this.
of your conversation.
Really? How
Yeah,
far?
yeah, or a minute or two. Yeah.
We can go back. Uh, We can go back. So let's share again.
Nicole, I think you were just done with the acronym.
All right, Money Mark. Appreciate you. Of course, you hear that. That's Money Mark, guys. That is Mr. Florida. Um, yeah, of course, Mark would know the acronym. But look at that. Good thing I have my phone on. My phone is not on. Well, I mean, it gets Wi-Fi, but it was on cellular, so or data, so I was able to see that drop. All right, so you guys can see my screen again. Let's get this back up. I'm missing something. I'm missing the chat. Where's my chat? Hold on 1 second. I'm missing my chat. Oh, 1 second. 1 second. There it is. I don't see my chat, but oh well. Anyway. All right. So, dang, 2 minutes. So I was on number 5 then. Oh, wait. Am I recording? Okay, make sure I'm recording again.
You're talking about title
Uh,
and closing. Yeah.
yeah, let me make sure we are. Yes, we are recording. All right. So back up. We wrapped up number 5, saying what the going over the IPAC acronym. Again, you're going to explain to the buyer that at step 5 of phase 2 is where the lender is giving their final loan approval, comparing the pre-approval before they go into contract to final approval, because final approval requires the property being approved by the lender. And just for you guys' information, the property being approved by the lender includes, of course, clear title, condition if the loan calls for that, of course, value, right? Now, number 6, title, closing, and possession. We are explaining to the buyer that you're going to work with a title agent who is going to ensure that you get clear title to the property. They're also going to facilitate the transfer of funds from you as a buyer to the seller, right? And that's where you're going to get your keys. So, the purpose of this roadmap during this during your buyer consultation, and again, 30,000 foot view, is to make sure that we not have a confused buyer, right? A confused buyer is unclear on the steps, the timelines, like what do I do next? Many of you are going to have first time buyers, or you're going to have buyers, again, like I mentioned earlier, that haven't purchased in many years. You'll be surprised. I was telling Nick earlier, we still have buyers that come to closing like, where are the sellers? They're expecting to see everyone at the table. Like, man, they signed 3 weeks ago, right? So we have to make sure that we have to make sure that we want to not assume we want to just not assume that folks know more than they do. And then it's better to have the information and not need it than to need it and not have it, right? We don't want to overwhelm them with information, but there's just some foundational information that we should share with them. And if they don't need it, great. But if they do, it's there. Surprise costs and frictions happen with a confused buyer and vague representation. They don't know what's going on. Versus a converted buyer, we have a structured presentation. We have a structured presentation. We have a clear financial and expense discussion, right? And then we have defined expectations of their responsibilities. So this is the roadmap. This is phase 3 of your consultation. Consultation resources that you should have. Of course, we mentioned the slide deck. I just gave you guys what you could use as just take the verbiage from it, even the layout, whatever. Or even, maybe even you can create your own, but it's just an example of what that slide deck can look like. You should have a slide deck, but keep it brief. Keep it brief. It doesn't have to be super long, because you're going to find that you're going to be talking, they're going to get questions, and you're going to be answering questions about the information anyway. So it's best for you not to have a lot of slides that you're going to have to talk about. Just hit your key points, right? And then also you should have a guide. That guide, the leave behind guide, should be where they get the elaboration of all those 6 steps that we discussed in phase 1 and phase 2, right? That leave behind guide should be where they have the purchase and sale contract, right? That leave behind guide should also have, of course, more about you, the same as you would send when you have your listing presentation. Guys, treat your buyer presentation the same as you do a listing presentation. Okay. All right. So then we transition into discussion regarding your professional representation. And so a quote that you can borrow, just like an attorney or CPA formalizes their representation, we document how we work together so expectations are clear and your interests are protected. That's how we transition into discussing this document, this buyer's brokerage agreement. We operate as professional advisors as well, real estate advisors. So just like an attorney or CPA formalizes their representation of you, we document as well how we work together so expectations are clear and your interests are protected. Pivot right into your buyer's brokerage agreement, right? So we talked about last week, we went over the buyer brokerage agreement. For the purposes of your discussion, you can have a slide similar to this. You're saying that the agreement structure lays out the broker's responsibility, the buyer's responsibility. One other point that you want to make is this here. Representation without an executed agreement is not allowed. Again, you're going to have buyers who are unaware of the NAR settlement. And they're saying, oh, well, I work with this. So let's be professional and just assume that they were unaware and not that they went to another agent and the agent didn't require it. We're gonna act like we don't hear those. We're gonna act like we don't hear that. We're gonna act like everyone is abiding by they're being compliant and they're getting their buyer's brokerage agreement executed. So we're gonna assume that the buyer just was unaware, right? So the point being, you have to make sure that you explain to the buyer that this is required. This isn't optional. This isn't optional. Okay. All right. And then of course, outside of your responsibilities, their responsibilities, the compensation structure. Remember we talked about last week, you're going to have in your buyer's brokerage agreement how much you're going to be paid. The buyer's brokerage agreement itself, it starts from a position of the buyer paying that compensation, right? We know that when the buyer executes that buyer's brokerage agreement, it starts from a position of the buyer paying the compensation. Unless and until you negotiate for the seller to pay all of it or for the seller to pay a portion of it. But this is something that you have to be able to discuss clearly with the buyer, right? So you're going to explain to the buyer, this is how I'm paid, right? I'm paid by whatever you guys agree to, 3%, 2.5%, 2%. Now, and this agreement provides that you're responsible for paying this cost. This becomes a closing cost to you. However, we 100% have the opportunity to structure my compensation so that you advise that unless the seller is offering compensation, that we do not go into contract to purchase that property. You got to just say it just that clearly, right? Because you don't want them to get confused and say, oh, we love this property. Well, they're not willing to pay the compensation. If we go into contract for this property, then you're going to have to pay it. Remember that conversation we had about the compensation structure? Well, this is where that comes into play. All right. Remember where I told you where we agreed that we would see properties, we would make an offer, and we would negotiate for the seller to pay my compensation. But if the seller's not agree to pay, then we're not going to go into contract because this is an additional closing cost to you. All right. Now, we've hit all 5 portions, high level, of what your buyer consultation should look like. Remember, it's all about structure. The result is what confuses a buyer, you avoid this. You avoid what confuses a buyer when you have a structured buyer consultation. That is unclear steps, no timeline, surprise cost, hello, your compensation, vague representation. Oh, I didn't know I didn't know I couldn't go. Remember we talked about last week, the buyer's mortgage agreement covers any property that they see during the time of your representation, however they find out about it, any property, right? If cousin Sue at Thanksgiving dinner tells them about a property and they want to go see it, that buyer's mortgage agreement says that as at your first opportunity, you're supposed to notify that seller, oh, I'm represented by Mark. Hold on one second. This is great. I love it. But when it comes to making an offer, I'm represented by Mark, right? You'll be surprised how many buyers, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know I couldn't just go to Lennar and, well, they said they would help me. They have agents there. Why do I need you? Right? Vague representation. But when you structure this, now they know because you're going to point out clearly, listen, every property, every transaction we need to discuss, right? So we avoid that and we run into a confident roadmap, clear financials, because we're going to have a clear conversation with them about a pre-approval and not just a shoddy pre-approval, but a well underwritten pre-approval, right? We don't want to scare them, but we want to be honest with them that it is possible that they can get a pre-approval from a lender that's just trying to see if it sticks. We're going to try and work through this. Yeah, go shop. And while you're shopping with that buyer, they're trying to figure out how to get get their credit up, trying to find cash, trying to clear up bad tax returns. Listen, it happens. We don't want that. We want to know up front, will this ultimately get an approval? Define expectations and professional presentation. Professional. When you have this structure, it's professional. So our recap. This is what we covered today. We covered that you're going to have your consultation flow, right? We covered that within that consultation flow, you're going to make sure that you include a purchase roadmap for your buyers, right? You're going to include a roadmap for sure. And we're going to make sure that we keep in mind as we design our buyer consultation that we don't want a confused buyer. We want a buyer that converts. We want a confident buyer. A confident buyer is going to convert.
I'm not playing with y'all, please.
Right? So, if you feel awkward when you conduct your buyer's consultation, it's because you're trying to earn trust instead of demonstrating structure. Just trust me. I know. Just trust me. It's going to be okay. And you're like, all right. I mean, I guess. Using the same, just trust me, Candace. Just drive straight. Just drive straight. You'll get there. If you just keep going straight, you'll get to Kalamazoo, Missouri. And Candace's like, all right, I guess. Versus me saying, here's your turn-by-turn navigation to Kalamazoo. All right. So, your assignment, audit your current consultation. How are you conducting your buyer consultation? Build your 10-slide deck. I put 10 there. It could be less. You know what you need to hit. You need to make a connection. You need to make sure that you verify their financial status and that they're clear on it. You want to make sure that they understand at a high level, here's what this process is going to look like from consultation to closing. You want to make sure that they understand your buyer's brokerage agreement, and you want to make sure that it's signed. If you can do that in 5 slides, more power to you. Don't let it be more than 10. You should be able to get it done in 10, right? And then you want to standardize your scripting. This is important. You want to standardize your scripting because the worst case scenario is if you don't want to have to reinvent the wheel every time. That's why we're taking the time to create systems. You guys know the word systems, right? You don't want to have to reinvent the wheel every time. I talked about, I think it was our first session, with buyers and sellers, you get the same questions, right? Oftentimes get the same questions. Let's go ahead and have an answer. Let's have an FAQ where all the questions you've been asked or what they should ask, right? Let's use ChatGPT. Let's build an FAQ. Let that be in your leave behind, in your guide. And let's highlight the most common questions and make sure that we have a succinct response that answers their questions and clears their confusion and makes them confident, right? And then lastly, you want to role play the agreement presentation. Role play that, because again, you're going to be having, you're telling a buyer, I want you to make sure you understand how this compensation structure works. When this agreement is executed, it makes you a party to it. You're now responsible for paying it. However, the way we remove this burden from you is that we negotiate with the seller. We make sure that we don't go into contract with the seller who does not agree to cover this cost for you, right? So you want to be clear. Don't hide the ball. Don't hide the ball. You're gonna make it harder for yourself. I want to reiterate that. Everybody clear on that? Don't hide the ball concerning compensation, because again, if you do and the buyer finds a property that they absolutely love and the seller knows they have a hit, and they're like, no, this is the last property in Miami or Florida. We don't say Miami, whatever. This is the last property in America. No buyer consultation. Sorry, buyer compensation. Figure it out. Find your own closing costs. And the buyer looks at you like, what do you mean? Why can't I make an offer? Because they're not paying my compensation. You told me you don't have the money to pay it. We can't buy this property, right? So we want to be clear on that. Conversion happens in clarity. Questions. Who do I need to convert into being more confident and excited about their buyer consultations now? Does anybody need to be converted? Is anybody still unconvinced of the value of their buyer consultation? No? Wonderful. Wonderful. I'm going to assume that it's because you're clear now, not only on the purpose, but a good framework to get that out, right? All right. So last week we have some new faces. So I want to make sure that I give an opportunity for our new lab members to participate in our survey. I mentioned to you guys at the beginning of this month, it is very clear that we have an epidemic. I'm sorry, we have an epidemic. Houston, we have a problem. And that problem is we have so much focus on lead generation that we have lost focus on transaction mastery. We have. And I want to let you know that I'm planting my flag here that leads do not close themselves. They don't. They don't close themselves. If I dump you with 10 leads today and you don't know what to do with them, you don't have the transaction mastery to come behind it, I may as well not have given them to you, right?
So the other day I went to a realtor class on how to use Instagram. You know, when I started real estate, which was a million years ago, we used to go to classes on how to calculate buyer's loan payments and how to figure out what someone's house was worth, things that might be important to the buying and selling of real estate. But now I go to a class where I learn not to use hashtags anymore because they're so last year. You know, let's kind of go back to when realtors actually knew about real estate. What do you think?
What do you think? Transaction mastery. What do you think? So I want to make sure that we understand that marketing is surface level as it relates to your business. Transaction mastery is below the surface. The real skill starts after the lead connects. Just based on the conversation we had today, if I gave you 10 buyer leads, and these are 10 good buyer leads, not like the buyers are liars leads, right? These are 10 good buyer leads. If you didn't learn a masterful way of delivering a consultation to them to make sure that when you guys get out in the field, there's no question about there has to be more properties available, Mark. Or what do you mean we can't make an offer just because they're not paying your compensation? How do you get paid? Right? If you don't know that, then we have a problem. Marketing is just the tip of the iceberg for your business. It's very important, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. 90% of your job is what actually drives the transaction to the closing table. right? You can spend thousands of dollars on leads. This is what I need you guys to understand. You can buy leads. You can't buy transaction mastery. Even if you even if you hire a transaction coordinator, guess what? It's still your license on the line if they make a mistake. You can buy leads. You cannot buy transaction mastery. So you need to make sure that you guys are clear on that. So with that being said, the last thing I need you guys to do, I'm gonna drop this in the chat. We have been providing a survey to everyone. I want to make sure that we are building heretofore what you all need for transaction mastery. I'm going to copy this link. I'm going to drop it in the chat. Many of you have already completed this survey before. Thank you so much for completing it. I'm excited about sharing the results with everyone. But for those of you, if this is your first time with us and you've not taken this survey before, I would really appreciate if you could take that so that you can help us build what we need specifically for you all to feel like a master of your transactions. All right? Jonquil, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my question is, as a new agent, for me, when I went through my training with my broker, it was all about the contract. After it was about the contract, then it was, okay, go out and start marketing yourself. And with all due respect, I've heard that a lot. So where do you go to get? I mean, where do you start? I mean, where do you start at to learn how to, do your marketing and, the buyer consultation, which of course what we're doing now, but the meat of the transactions.
Well,
What do
I'm
you
going to
do?
tell you,
I mean,
first
it
of all,
doesn't just drop out the sky.
okay, so I have a two-part answer for you. One is your brokerage should teach you that. Number two, that's what Purchase Ready Lab is for. So
Okay.
stick around. And like I said, that's what the survey is for as we develop a more structured delivery system and training system around the transaction. That's literally why I told you where this is where I'm planting my flag. It's a problem. It's an epidemic. You guys know, as a real estate attorney, I see the gaps. I see what no one knows. I see, like you said, they run out. Just go get buyers. And remember, I mentioned this maybe 2 classes ago. One of the classes I wrote, Anatomy of a Transaction, was because years ago, a new agent got at that time, it was like $450,000 contract, a deal under contract. And he said, all right, Rico, what do I do now? I was like, what? 450 back then was like probably 750 today. And he said, what do I do now? And so that class that question, that incident prompted the class Anatomy of a Transaction, because he did not know where does this thing go now to get to closing. So that's the answer to your question. So where we are now is back to the fundamentals. When I saw that Instagram post, I was like, listen, that's it. Like I don't need to see it again. I don't want to continue to sit back and of course, in confidentiality, you guys call with your fires, I put them out. But if we can take those learnings and present them to the group before your deal is on fire, then that's what you're asking for. All right. All right. I saw Derek had his hand up, and then we're gonna go to May.
Thank you, Raquel. Great information, by the way.
No, thank you for being here.
My pleasure. I come from the pre-construction world where the commissions are upfront. The developers are telling us what they're going to give us. I've had a couple buyer and I've called some listings. I know the MLS, they can't put the compensation. I call up the agents and ask them if they're paying anything, and what their answer usually is just put it in put it in the offer, put it in the contract. I don't want to be wasting time driving somebody around showing if they're not going to pay any compensation, especially if my buyer says they're not willing to pay a compensation. But how do you handle that? What, is that, can you ask them straight out? Is that, do you waste time driving people around and not, and present a contract and the seller says, no, they're not going to pay the compensation?
You can. Nick, are you available? Nick, you want to answer that question? Because we literally were just having this conversation. Was it last week? I want to say.
Yeah, I can answer that.
Awesome, Nick.
One of the things when you're submitting an offer, a lot of times, I mean, I sometimes list properties where the seller's not paying compensation. So what the buyer's agent, a seasoned buyer's agent will do is adjust the offer price to factor in whether it's 2.5, 3, 3.5, whatever their compensation is. Example, if you're offering on a $400,000 property, instead of offering 400, you offer plus 3%, so 412. So that factors in your compensation. And there's no agent or seller that should turn it down because you're increasing the price to cover your compensation. And if you want to get some of it, maybe 2% from the seller and then 1% from the buyer, you can always do that as well if the buyer has some of it. That way you don't have to, but you have to make sure the property is priced in line so that it appraises. And everything's subject to
Right.
appraisal anyway.
That's
So
correct.
that's one way of structuring your deal is to increase the price to cover it. Or if you're going to offer 370, you offer 370 plus the compensation and you let the agent, the listing agent know, because a lot of listing agents still aren't familiar with how deals are structured. So you just
Mhm.
have to be
Mhm.
clear that you're offering the increased price to cover the compensation since they're not covering the compensation. That's a short answer to the solution.
Okay, but okay, so Nick, so you're saying that when you talk to the seller is you're listening, they're not offering compensation. So how would a buyer's broker know that? I had to have to call every agent on that list of my properties I'm going to see. I've got to actually call them and find out. And are
Unfortunately,
you going to
not,
tell me
because
if
you
I
can't
tell?
put it in the MLS. That's
Absolutely,
exactly.
because you can't put it in MLS. You can't put compensation in
Mhm.
MLS anymore. So you
Mhm.
have to ask, what's the compensation that's offered on this property? Otherwise, you have no way. If you're submitting with 3% and they, wait a minute, no, I'm only offering 2%, then you've got to redo your offer. So before, because agents submit offers on listings not they typically expect 3%, but that's not always being offered. So you're safe once you find a property, or even before you show it, you ask, what's the compensation? I mean, you're not showing 20 properties, you should be narrowing it down anyway. So you call the 3 or 4 agents on the properties you're showing when you're setting up the showings, or send them a text. What's the compensation being offered?
Three or four of those agents always respond saying, write up an offer and we'll see. Depends on what the price, so
The agent should have
frustrating.
a listing. What does your listing agreement say? Because every agent has a listing agreement with
Mhm.
and a compensation agreement with their seller, and it should indicate what the seller is willing to offer.
So
So
their
that
thing
it
is,
should
and this I agree with Derek, and this is why we were having a conversation. I'll be honest with you. I mean, good, bad, or indifferent. I'm like Derek to the extent that I don't like the hide the ball thing. I don't like that. That's a hide the ball to me. You guys know me. I'm a very much let's get to the resolution. I can understand, however, where if you have a you could potentially where your seller said they're willing to pay 3%. Going back to what Nick said, the listing agreement says 3%, but the buyer's agent makes an offer where they're only asking for 2%. Okay, now the listing agent looks like a hero. So I can
Mhm.
see where it makes sense, right? But at the same time, um, there is something to be said about, like I said, not as a listing agent, not hiding the ball and just being more supportive in getting that offer over the finish line, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can imagine if I ask them, what does your listing agreement say? They'll say, none of your business.
Correct. And
Just
same
make an
thing for
offer.
you. They
Like,
don't have to tell you. Same thing for
make a,
you, because here's the deal. Let's look at the other way. You can make an offer where you're requesting 3% and your buyer's brokerage agreement only says 2%. And if
Mhm.
if you get them to accept 3%, what are you gonna do? You're gonna just modify your buyer's brokerage agreement and get your 3%.
Mhm. Yeah,
Does that make sense? It goes both ways.
yeah.
It goes both ways.
But they have to be willing to tell you what they're willing to pay, what kind of compensation.
And they will, because again, going back to what Nick said, the seller is going to have a bottom line, right? They're going to have a bottom line. And we're not seeing, and I can pull the data for you. We're not the lion's share of transactions, the sellers are paying compensation.
Mhm.
I've
Yeah.
closed deals where the buyer has paid, but most transactions the sellers are still paying. So you're not going to have a situation where you don't get a you don't get a transaction where the seller's paying compensation. What you need to do is, like Nick mentioned, and just a big proponent of systems, is you have a system around how you have that discussion. Number one, like Nick said, you shouldn't be having this conversation on 20 properties anyway. So
Mhm.
let's narrow down the properties that you're interested in so that I can shoot out an email, shoot out a text. The email can be with template language, the text is template language, and you make the phone call with the script. Hey, I'm interested in showing your property. How much is the seller willing to da da da? And say, okay, well, just make an offer. And you just have that already set. So and
Okay.
then the last thing I'll say to you is don't feel just know that you're in the same position as every other buyer's agent. Because it's no longer in the MLS, this is part of our process to make an offer, which includes buyer agent compensation. Does that make sense?
100%. Yep.
Very good question. And I appreciate that question, and that tells us that we just need to do a class around that.
Yeah. It's a tough one.
Because that's what it is. This is always about how do we streamline this? Everything is about streamlining, guys. To me, that's how I look at it. That's why I love title, because title is so prone to streamline. Transactions in general, I'll say that. As an attorney, that's why I lean on the transaction side versus litigation. Transactions are very susceptible to streamlining. Check the
Yeah.
box. Check, 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 check.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I'm gonna say this whole lawsuit was to avoid steering, but if they're not paying compensations, you're going to steer the buyer away from that property. So they're still steering. I don't understand that. So I'm not going to show properties that aren't
yeah,
compensation if the buyer doesn't want to pay.
right,
Yeah.
right. We still landed in the same place.
Yeah.
What's your
Well,
question? She said, "Oh no, I'm not." What's up?
Hi, thank you, Rako. I'm seeing my prospect next week, and so I can prepare for those structure. And thank you for
Yes.
that. I have two questions.
Yay.
I missed some of the classes, so where can I go and watch the old video? And the second question is there any agent in this group right now near the Fort Lauderdale, Florida? So I would like to connect if they have open house. Since I'm a new agent, I would like to go and visit their open house and go and meet them.
So first answer is on the YouTube page will be the recording that'll be posted within 24 hours. Also, the team sends out an email letting you know that the recording is posted. With that being said, guys, make sure you check your spam. My own email goes to my spam, and they've not figured that out just yet how to get that address. Also, you guys are probably noticing that you're not getting text messages. That has changed. There's a whole new verification of the campaign that needs to take place. We're working on that so that you can start getting your text message reminders as well. Now, with that being said, what may need to happen, so just a heads up, just a little bit of forecasting, we may need to send out an email where you approve receiving text messages so that you can receive them. But just because I'm sure you guys are probably getting the text message about you've been approved for a loan. It's just getting crazy. So the filter on text messages has gotten much more stringent. So that's why you guys aren't getting text. So that'll be back. And then you said in Florida, what part of Florida are you in where you can
Fort
cover?
Lauderdale. Fort
Oh,
Lauderdale.
Fort Lauderdale. Okay, so guys, just keep in mind Maya's in Fort Lauderdale and the surrounding areas. If you have you have listings where you need to have it held open, reach out to Mai. All right, Mai, drop your email address and your phone number in the chat.
Okay. And
And then
how
congratulations.
can
Oh, you got another question. Go
I
ahead.
have some other agent new? So how can I invite them to join these classes?
Oh, just send them to purchasereadylab.com.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, send it to the website, purchaseredielab.com. Candace, new contract, Candace.
Repeat, Purchase Ready Lab, holla. We're title experts. Let me say that. My
Title company,
question
yes.
is, I like that previous question about adding, offering a little bit more, and that covers your compensation. So when we go to title, or what document do we reference that we're offering X amount, but this specific amount is for compensation, or is it all going in the loan? Like, talk to me.
It's all going in the loan. Exactly. That's a very good question. So next week, I'm glad that's another, see if we could fit that in there. So next week we're talking about we're going over the lending process for realtors, high level. So let's the following week do a class on how to structure, what does that structure look like on the lending side when you include the compensation, which is not anything significant other than going back to Derek's question. You just have to make sure that you don't go above the buyer's loan amount, right? So you're gonna know
Correct.
that's it. That's you just know, and the property needs to appraise, right? So you can't go out and offer
Right.
400,000
Something
for this
crazy.
property. Yes,
I know that
right.
contract is between the buyer and the seller. So which document do we put that specific verbiage on?
Yeah, look at that. Very good question. The contract. So now you have your compensation agreement. So remember, that goes back to last year. You have your contract. If the seller is providing, of course, the seller's providing compensation, you're gonna have your compensation agreement.
Right.
Um, and that's it. Now, if it's one where you are, and that's a whole nother class, where you're using the writer, then of course you will have the writer. I'm looking for my binder that has my
Those
my
FF and
contract.
GG writers, that's where you would say the house is, they're asking 400,000, but we're going to make an offer of 412,000. That would go on those
So we have
FFGG.
right, you have the FF and the GG. One is for credit, so you get a closing cost credit,
Right.
and the other one is for a compensation agreement,
Right, the GG.
right? So the difference is, and so now that needs to be class 3, which is fine. So the difference between those two is one, the seller is giving a credit, and that is part of the contract. Two, the other one is the seller is giving compensation, which they both, like you said, they both end up being payment to the agent, but they're just called two different things.
Okay. I'm here for it.
Very good
Sign me up.
question. All right. All right, Mai. See you later. All right, guys, no matter how short I try to keep this class, we still go over. Remember, our goal is 45 minutes, but I get it. All right, it's 1:10.
Gems on top of gems every
Listen,
time.
it's so much. That's why, again, we're going to get all of this information. We're going to get it synthesized into a course, and it's going to go into the lab, and you guys are going to have access to it to watch it on your own time. And when we come together on Thursdays, it's going to be implementation questions. That's what this survey is about. I need to get what you don't know, make sure that that's included in the course, make sure that that is housed in the course portal. And then when we come together on Thursday, it's not so much about teaching. You'll be learning the information by quick videos. But when we come together on Thursdays, it'll be, here's what you really need to focus in on. What questions do you have about this? That's the goal. That's the goal.
Are we going to incorporate Notebook LM? It's because that's a great way to do like a quiz or
Yes, it's
something.
so funny you said that. Yes, I want to also teach you guys
A
how
game
to use.
changer.
I absolutely want to teach you guys how to use the Google Suites. 100%. 100%, which includes, I want you guys to have branded domains, email address. So, Candace at CandaceFitzJordan.com. You should have that. regardless of where you go, you should have, meaning wherever you hang your license, you should have that branded, and then you should have that branded domain, and then now you're using your branded email address in your Gmail. And what Candace is asking about is I showed them last year a way to create this presentation. I'm telling you guys about creating a buyer's consultation. I showed Candace last year and some others who were in a training about how you can take your content and then quickly create a presentation. Truth be told, Notebook LM created the core of this. I just put my custom slides on portions of it. But yeah, it's a lot I got to teach you guys. Oh my God. Y'all going to turn me into a teacher versus a title attorney. But anyway, any other, okay, Joquel, one more question. You guys can
Yes,
run. Anybody else to run, but go ahead. Go ahead.
quick question. So I
Yes.
know I joined the classes or the the minutes on Thursdays. How do I join your class? Is there another class outside of what we do on
There,
Thursdays?
there will be, yes. There will
Okay.
be there will be a course portal that you
Okay.
have access. Yes.
Okay.
There will be a course portal that has the recorded courses therein that you can listen to at your, they call it asynchronous. You can listen to it on your own time, listen to it as many times as you need to. And then when we come together on Thursdays, Thursdays are about implementation. Remember, I told you guys at the beginning, last year, or even prior to now, information is great. You need the information, but then I need you to implement it because that's where you're going to feel like you've actually accomplished something, right? So you have the information today. Now somebody's going to say, all right, I got this, but now how do I do this? Well, that's where implementation will come in, where like Candace said, I will show you, let's outline what your buyer's consultation is going to look like. Let's upload it to Notebook LM and let it spit out your deck in 10 minutes, and literally in 10 minutes. Literally in 10 minutes. All right. All right, guys.
What
This has
is
been
that?
great. See you next week. Bye.
What is that? Liquidation sale, all things must sell. You must. Thank you. What is that?